Joining us via Skype is Julio Gonzalez. He's the CEO and founder of Engineered Tax Services. Welcome, Julio.
Good morning.
Morning. It was reported that large corporations, including Amazon, Netflix, JetBlue, and IBM, paid $0 in taxes in 2018. Can you tell us how do these large companies get away with doing this?
It doesn't feel right, when we're all paying our taxes.
Yes.
And you see these big corporations not paying taxes. But ultimately, the reports are stating that they're not paying taxes because they're having state credit incentives, they're having other federal tax incentives, and ultimately the depreciation of assets that they invest in. So I think that those things really didn't change in tax reform. Those things have always been around. The only thing that changed in tax reform was going from 35% to 21%. But 35 or 21% of zero is zero, right? So I think that when we did tax reform and went down to 21%, we were trying to be more competitive from a business standpoint globally and see if that would attract more businesses here to the United States or keep businesses here in the United States. And the ultimate test of that is the employment rate and how much money is going to Treasury to see if that plan is working. Because whether you have a 35% tax rate under the old rate, 21% under the new rate, really the measuring stick is how are we doing with getting money into Treasury and how are we doing with employment.
So according to the IRS, average tax refund is down 8%. How did this happen after President Trump promised to lower taxes for families and individuals in 2017?
Good question. I've been seeing a lot of that. I think that it's, a mixed answer, and certainly we've looked at tax returns as well. So some of it, part of it is people had lower, weekly payroll deductions from their W-2 and I-9 filings. So
does that mean
can be part of it.
That means they were getting more take-home pay? So that's why they're
getting more take-home pay. I think the ultimate, judge is, I'm getting a less return, less refund, but am I ultimately getting more cash on an annual basis? So you have to look at that to, truly measure the results. But also, in certain areas, people lost some deductions. They lost SALT deductions in certain states, and certainly that had an impact. So you have to question, was that good for, the federal government? Did we need to support people that are taking state and local tax deductions as a country? And ultimately, was that a good move or not? And I think that's been the big issue here.
And what was the cutoff for the SALT deduction? Because as I understand it, it was pretty generous.
The SALT deduction went from, whatever it was, right, which was any state and local taxes paid in, to $10,000. Good question, Carrie, because most people that paid over $10,000 in state and local tax deductions under the old rules were phased out by AMT, so they didn't get any deductions. But certainly there's that range of people between $150,000 to $200,000. How many, is that 2% of all taxpayers that, would be impacted by that one? So, that's the trade-off. There's winners and losers. Ultimately was the U.S. Treasury and IRS the winner in collecting more taxes, and we have to measure that.
Well, and is the IRS collecting more overall?
Well, the reports, so far through January, February, and March are that more money is going to Treasury. Employment rates are lower. So, for the first few months of this year, it looks like it overall is working and working well. And so we'll continue to monitor that and see how it goes. I mean, hopefully, we can continue to tweak the tax code and see where we had good progress, where we didn't, and make adjustments.
And I distinctly remember the president at one point saying it'll be so easy to file your taxes. You could just do it on a postcard. It still felt relatively the same in filing this year.
Yeah, I think that there was a goal to get a tax return down to a postcard. There's no chance that goal was ever going to happen because you had way too many lobbyists out there influencing what could be taken from the code, what couldn't be taken from a code. We have 1 million pages of code, and how are you going to take 1 million pages, even if you boil it down to less than that, right? Less than that. And ultimately get the tax returns down to one page. But what they did is they doubled the standard deduction, so for a lot of filers that could just use that standard deduction and not have to itemize, that would get them down to 2 pages of a tax return. That was hopeful. And I think, the big thing was, can we have tax reform 2.0 right after tax reform 1.0, which was really getting the corporate tax rate down, to continue to simplify, the tax return system. I think that was a goal for everyone. But clearly, that didn't happen. We're not getting down to a postcard. And I don't see that ever happening when you have millions of people up there lobbying for everything they want into the tax code.
All right. Well, Julio Gonzalez, thanks so much for joining us, as always.
All right. Good seeing you guys.
Bye.
Bye.